Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be going over Game 4 from the 2014 World Chess Championships. Quick recap, Game 1 was a draw. We didn't expect too much. Anand had the white pieces, but usually, again, in a big tournament like this, the first game, no one's trying to do anything too much, just trying to get back in the rhythm of playing high-level chess. So, first game was a draw. Carlsen came out in the second game with the white pieces, played a very, very great game, put a lot of pressure on his opponent, ended up winning that game, and then the last game, Game 3, Anand actually with the white pieces did something he didn't do very often, and he beat Carlsen. So we are all squared away, tied up, going into game number 4. Carlsen is going to be playing the white pieces. Anand is going to be playing the black pieces. So we'll go ahead and get with it. Carlsen again starts with kind of that very aggressive opening. He likes that pawn here to e4. Very different than Anand, usually starting with that pawn here to d5, or excuse me, d4. And Anand kind of took everyone by surprise. He played the Sicilian defense. Now, the Sicilian defense is a very great defense, but it usually leads to a lot of sharp lines, and usually there's a winner. And so this is basically saying, hey, Carlsen, just want to let you know, I won last game, I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm coming to actually take points even when I'm playing as black. So that's pretty cool to see. We were expecting more of a long, drawn-out, boring, drawish game, and so the Sicilian defense definitely kind of setting the tone for a potentially exciting game. Carlsen decided to attack the Sicilian defense with the King's Indian attack. So just kind of going through here, it's more of a system than it is a series of moves you can kind of get here. It even played against different defenses, Sicilian, French defense. Those are some of the main lines that you play the King's Indian attack against. But it's kind of a slowish style play. If you're pretty familiar with it, it's not the most dynamic. There's not a lot of crazy lines attacking the Sicilian defense. So was a little surprised by Carlsen. I'm not sure if he was caught off guard by the Sicilian defense, but he definitely didn't attack it with the most aggressive offense that he could have. But we continue with the normal King's Indian attack, castling on the king side here, knight to f6, getting ready to get the dark square bishop involved into the game, castle on the king side as well. Both sides are going to be looking to control this e file right here. White's going to continue just to develop, get his other minor pieces involved into the game, pushing forward here first with pawn to d4, bishop to e7 as we talked about, bishop to e3, development move, also just adding another defender on this pawn here on d4. We see the exchange and then the knight coming over here to d4. Could have taken a number of different ways, but decided he wanted to go ahead and open up the door for his light square bishop to kind of control this center square right here. So Anand does have the last central pawn, so something to keep note. It is an isolated pawn, but eventually it could become a pass pawn. Could also become a very dangerous pass pawn, depending on how Carlsen defends going into the late game. So we see bishop to g4 again, both sides just continuing their development, not getting out of hand too fast. Queen to d3. Next will be just to get the knight involved, connect the rooks, and then Carlsen will be done with his development. Queen here to d7. This opens up the door for potentially castling on the queen side, but there's no way that Anand's going to do that with a semi-open c-file. There'd just be too much attacking prowess that Carlsen could have. So he's going to be castling on the king side. Knight to d2. It's kind of we talked about, just developing, castling on the king side for Anand. And then knight to f3. Kind of interesting move. Replacing the knight here on f3 from the knight that came over here to b1. So you don't see it too often, but Carlsen's really starting to put a lot of pressure on the king side. I'd be interesting to see if he starts to push on the queen side as well. I do think, especially in the King's Indian, the fact that the King's Indian attack, it's overlooked sometimes, and so this may be an opportunity to try to attack on the queen side since there's not much going on over here. But right now, he's content just moving all of his pieces over to the king side. Rook over here to e8, again controlling that long file. Rooks always belong on a semi-open file or a completely open file. The more room any piece, especially the rook, can control, it's definitely going to be better for them. So rook here to e1, kind of countering, attacking that. Bishop here to d6, opening up the door. More of a centralized square, but also opening up the door for this rook to really control here. Pawn to c3, not only defending this pawn or this square here on d4, but also consolidating a little bit of the defense of this square here here on b4, making sure his opponent can't bring his bishop down here to b4, his knight down here to b4. So again, just solidifying pawn chain a little bit. There's no great place for him to go, so they're just trying to slowly improve each of their positions. So pawn here to h6, again, just kind of blocking off, solidifying this g5 square right here. Interesting move from Magnus Carlsen right here. He plays queen here to f1. Now, a lot of the high-level players, Nigel Sport actually made a comment that he thought this was a great move. He even put an exclamation point by it. I'm not sure if he meant that, but he said this was a classic Magnus Carlsen move where when you look at it, it doesn't look like it's doing too much, but it's just really difficult for your opponent to play against it. Vishy Anand may have wanted to play bishop here to h3, and then maybe an exchange right here, where that's not good anymore. For Magnus Carlsen, I think he had a few other options. Yes, queen to f1 is difficult to deal with, but it's not very aggressive. He's still just kind of sitting back, not doing too much, not being super creative like I've seen him in the past. I think other moves, pawn here to a5 or a4 seems a lot more aggressive, starting to attack on the queen side. Even queen here to c2 is fine. He's kind of opened up this door with pawn here to c3. So this adds in a defender if he ever wants to play this pawn here to a4. But it's still controlling the light squares. In the game, again, he played this queen here to f1, which a lot of people think is good. I don't think it does much for him, but again, he's Magnus Carlsen. He's the best player in the world, so hopefully there was a very good reason for that. Bishop back here to h5, and then Magnus Carlsen, again, he had a few options. He could have continued on the queen side. He instead played pawn here to h3, so black has a much more aggressive approach to this game. Magnus Carlsen is just kind of consolidating all his pieces in this little area in front of his king. He's not really trying to push forward, put a lot of pressure on his opponent. He could have played even knight to h4, starting to just move his knight up the board, starting to attack some of the central squares. Knight here to f5 eventually might have been good after h4. He does have a defender with his knight, so a few different options. He chose the safer route with pawn to h3. Anand brought his bishop back here to g6, and then rook over here to d1. Again, you usually want to, after you connect your rooks, to centralize them and control the open and semi-open files. So the rook here is on the open file. Bring your rook over here to the semi-open file, and that's exactly what you want to do. The rook's going to swing over here to d8, again kind of countering that. Now the knight's going to exchange. We do see an exchange back here on c6, and then pawn to c4, trying to break up the central square. Controlling the center, especially in chess, is very, very important. So Magnus Carlsen wants to get this central square from Anand off the board. Vishy Anand has no desire to go ahead and exchange right here. He wants to be the one that has the central square. If there is going to be an exchange, he wants to be the one recapturing, so he has that control and he kind of has that lead in tempo. So he's not going to do anything right now. Instead, he's going to play bishop here to e4, because if there is an exchange, this is much better. He now recaptures, and so he kind of has that tempo compared to his opponent recapturing here. So he's going to play bishop here to e4, then bishop here to d4. The knight's going to come back here to h7. So a few different ways. Again, this bishop is attacking this knight. Vishy Anand doesn't necessarily want this bishop to take here on f6 and recapture here. So he could play knight here to h7, which he did. The computer, if you guys were watching the analysis, actually recommended knight here to, or rook here to e6. Kind of an interesting move. You usually don't want to be recapturing with your rook here on f6. So I thought that was an interesting move that I probably wouldn't have played. But, I guess when you are a computer and you think a 3,500 rating or whatever, you have some crazy way that you like to play. But I think it was a pretty safe play to go ahead and just play knight here to h7. Again, it wasn't doing a whole lot, so eventually he'll want to get that involved. But right now he doesn't want to recapture and have double pawns here on the f-file and not have either pawns connected. If he had a pawn right here on f6 and he also had his e-pawn, things would be okay. But since he doesn't want to have 4 pawn chains on board. That's definitely going to be bad going into the end game. So we see the pawn capture here on d5, and then recapture here on d5 with the bishop. So that's kind of how Anand wanted to capture. We do see an exchange off the board. All of a sudden, some of the pieces starting to fly off the board, which is nice because, again, both players haven't been doing too much. Magnus Carlsen hasn't been pushing the action. Vishy Anand, played the Sicilian defense, but he hasn't really tried to get in any creative or sharp tactical lines either. So good to see they're at least trying to exchange off some pieces. Maybe something happens from there. Knight coming back here to f8, getting ready to come to e6. More of a central square for that knight. Knight over here to h4. Bishop to e5, centralizing. We now see some exchanging in the middle of the board, and then pawn here to b3, being attacked by the queen here on e5, and then we see the knight coming here to e6 as we talked about. So both sides, again, just almost looking like they're trying to exchange just to get to the end game, not even really trying to win, in my opinion. So knight coming back here to f3. Queen to f6, attacking, so the kings can come up here to defend this. Rook over here to d8, the queen's just going to move. Comes down here to d5, more of a central square, but it's not really attacking too much. There is an exchange off the board. So black does have a passed pawn now on the d file, so we can start to push that. That looks like to be the only hope that either side has on board, unless there's a huge mistake, which has been prone to happen in these games between these two players. Knight here to e5, queen to f5, knight coming back here to d3, knight to d4. We kind of push up, pawn to g4, starting to attack on the king side a little bit, forcing the queen to move back. Queen to e5, so Magnus Carlsen putting a little bit of pressure. There's not any great squares he can really go to. Queen to b5. We do see an exchange off the board. So all of a sudden we go into the king and queen endgame, which is very, very difficult for one side to win. It has to make sure that you don't move your king too much, and it's not too exposed. Your opponent can then start to gobble up pieces while he's checking you, kind of chase you around the board. But especially if you have it near your queen, it's going to be very, very difficult for your opponent to do that because you can always just kind of block. So Vishy Anand's going to be trying to push forward with his pawn, but Magnus Carlsen, with a pretty active queen, is going to make sure that that does not happen. Queen here to b4. The king comes back here, starts to push a little bit. Magnus Carlsen just starts to check and take material, and then pawn to h4, the queen coming over here to a2, queen to e6. Again, both sides, there's just not a lot for them to do. All of a sudden we see them repeat some moves, and because of that, they decided to go ahead and draw. So it was a long game. It was around 4 hours. So if you kind of watched it, you kind of saw this. It wasn't very exciting. Afterwards, they asked Magnus Carlsen, and he said he's just not playing very well. He really didn't like how this game went. Last game, obviously, he said he didn't play very well. He lost that game. So hopefully Magnus Carlsen can get inspired. I've seen him play a lot better, and he himself acknowledge that he's just not playing very well. He's not seeing the lines that he's used to seeing in these games. So we have a day off tomorrow, rest for these players, then we come back for 2 more exciting games. So hoping that Vishy Anand, when he comes back with the white pieces, feels like he kind of has the edge right now, even though we're tied. I feel like he's playing the better chess, so we'll see if he can start to take the lead in his next match in a couple days. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.